If you've ever opened your front door and felt like the world flipped upside down in a single second, you know what I'm talking about. That moment when silence isn't peace, it's the warning before the storm. Mine came with an envelope on the floor and a name written in the corner I used to trust. I wasn't supposed to be home that morning. The flight back from Brussels had landed early, an uncommon blessing after a NATO briefing that ran 40 hours straight with less than 6 hours of sleep. I was still in uniform. My ribbons weren't even straight. My boots were caked in the foreign dirt of a base far from here. But home was home, or it used to be. The house was quiet, not peaceful, just still. You know that kind of stillness that feels wrong, like it's trying too hard? And there it was, a single white envelope lying halfway under the doorframe, no stamp, no return address, just my name, handwritten in that firm, overly practiced cursive, Camille Harrow. I knew that handwriting. Daniel. For 1 second, just one, I hoped it was something benign. A letter. Maybe even something apologetic. But that second didn't last long. I dropped my bag, picked it up, and opened it without ceremony. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Request for full physical and legal custody of minor child Elijah Croft. I didn't blink. My hands didn't even shake. Combat teaches you that. You go cold first, then comes the wave. But what came next? That was the real hit. I flipped the last page to see the attached support declarations, and there they were, Meredith and Jonathan Harrow, my parents, supporting Daniel's petition. Their signatures in blue ink, right under the words, concerns regarding Camille Harrow's emotional fitness due to prolonged military absence. I think I stared at that page for 5 full minutes, like it was written in another language. My mum once held my hand as I gave birth to Elijah. My dad built the crib with his own hands. He called Elijah his little fox. Now they were saying I was unfit to raise him, that I was unstable. I sat down on the edge of the couch, still in my uniform, medals pressing against my chest like weights I suddenly couldn't carry. My boots left dust on the rug. I didn't care. I called my mother. She picked up after 3 rings. Camille? I didn't even get a word out before she said it. You should have seen this coming. You've been gone more than you've been here. Elijah needs someone stable. I didn't yell. I didn't ask why. I just whispered, "You're supporting Daniel?" Her answer wasn't cruel. That would have been easier. It was calm, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it. He has a home. He has time. He listens. You chose the military. You chose distance. I swallowed hard. I didn't choose war. I chose service. I did it for him, for you. There was a pause. Then my father's voice came on speaker. Camille, this is not an attack. It's a course correction. A course correction. They were talking about taking my son like this was an accounting error. I ended the call, sat there in the silence they left behind. My whole life I thought family meant safety, loyalty, someone in your corner, even when the rest of the world turned against you. But now I was standing at the edge of a war I never saw coming, and the enemy wasn't foreign. It had my last name. That night, I didn't unpack. I just sat in the dark living room staring at Elijah's photo on the mantel. Him in his soccer jersey, gap-toothed smile, one arm slung around my neck like he didn't need anything else in the world. And suddenly, I felt like a stranger to it all. I'd fought wars in places most Americans couldn't point to on a map. I'd buried friends. I'd worn the flag on my shoulder through fire and frost. But none of it prepared me for this. This wasn't just betrayal. This was abandonment dressed up in concern. It was rejection wrapped in family values. It was being erased from the one role I held dearest, Mum. I wish I could tell you I cried, that I broke something, that I screamed, but the truth is I didn't. I just sat there feeling the weight of everything I'd ever given for them, my time, my body, my soul, and realized that not even that was enough to be loved unconditionally. And that's when something shifted. Because revenge stories don't always start with rage. Sometimes they start with silence, with stillness, with a woman sitting in her own living room, realizing she's not going to beg anyone to see her worth ever again. She's going to show it. There's a kind of pain that doesn't show up on X-rays. It doesn't bruise, doesn't swell, but it settles under your skin like a slow poison. That's the kind of pain I walked into that afternoon. 3 days after the envelope, my parents asked to have a calm conversation over lunch. Their exact words, not "we need to talk," not "let's clear the air," just lunch. I should have known better, but part of me still wanted to believe that this was a misunderstanding, that maybe they'd changed their minds, that maybe they'd seen how far this had gone and wanted to make it right. So I went. It was at their house, the one with the white porch swing and the hydrangeas my mother tended like they were royalty. I parked outside, stared at the front door for a full minute before stepping out of the car. I was still in civilian clothes, didn't feel like a general that day, just a daughter trying to keep what little was left. Inside, everything looked the same, except it didn't. There was Daniel, sitting at the dining room table, drinking coffee from my dad's favourite mug. My chest went cold. I turned to my mother. "What is he doing here?" She smoothed her blouse like she was preparing for a presentation. "We just wanted to have a civil discussion, together, for Elijah's sake." That word, civil, it has no place when you're being ambushed. Daniel gave me a smug little nod like he'd already won something. My father gestured toward the chair across from them. "Please, Camille, sit." I didn't sit. I looked at each of them, 3 people who had held my child, laughed with me over birthdays, wiped tears from Elijah's cheeks, and realized they were on one side of the table. I was on the other. "This isn't lunch," I said. "This is a hearing without the courtroom." Daniel cleared his throat like he was preparing for his monologue. "Camille, this isn't about you. It's about what's best for Elijah. He needs routine, presence. You're never here." I laughed. Short, sharp, bitter. "I wasn't here because I was overseas protecting people like you, so you could sit in this kitchen and sip coffee without fear." He shrugged, like my deployments were a mild inconvenience, not years of my life. But it wasn't his words that broke me. It was my mother's. She leaned forward, folded her hands, and said softly, "Maybe it's time you put family first for once." For once. Let that sink in. The woman who once sewed patches onto my uniforms. The woman who used to wait by the phone when I was stationed in Kandahar. The woman who decorated Elijah's nursery with her own hands. Now sitting across from me, aligning herself with the man who'd handed me a custody petition like it was a bill. I stared at her, trying to find even a flicker of hesitation, of doubt. But she didn't flinch. And neither did my father. "We're not trying to hurt you," he said. "We're just doing what's best." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. "You think what's best is removing a mother from her son's life?" No one answered, because the truth is they didn't think, they decided, they judged, and they called it love. I stood there in that too quiet kitchen, the ticking of the wall clock louder than anything else in the room, and realized I was outnumbered in my own family. I walked out, didn't slam the door, didn't shout. But when I stepped back into my car and closed the door behind me, I sat in silence for a long time. I couldn't cry, not yet. The tears were stuck somewhere too deep, but my jaw trembled, and my hands, they wouldn't stop shaking. And this might sound strange, but if you've ever been in that kind of room, if you've ever watched the people you love the most choose someone else over you, for no reason except that it was easier, you know exactly what I felt. I wonder, have you ever had that moment? When someone looked you in the eye and made you feel like you didn't belong at your own table? If that's ever happened to you, I want you to know you're not alone. Drop a comment, tell me, or just say, me. Because no one deserves to feel like an outsider in their own home. Not even a soldier, not even a mother. And yet, There I was. Not every war needs a battlefield. Some begin at a dining table, end in a courtroom, and are fought in silence, file by file, breath by breath. I didn't call them again. No follow-up. No arguments. No breakdowns. When people betray you once, you grieve. When they do it twice, you learn. But the third time, you start building a strategy. The night after that family meeting, I pulled out a yellow legal pad and wrote 3 names across the top. Daniel, Mom. Dad. 3 names, 3 fronts. 1 goal, Elijah. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to hurt them the way they hurt me. I just wanted the truth out in the open. And I wanted my son to come home. I started with the obvious, documents. I requested every court file Daniel had submitted. His lawyer didn't expect that. I could tell from the delay in response. When they finally arrived, I sat at the kitchen table, a glass of cold coffee next to me, and went page by page. They said I was unstable, neglectful, emotionally absent. And the worst part, they had supporting statements from my own parents backing it up. Lines like, "Camille has always prioritized duty over family. We've expressed concern about her emotional availability for years. She struggles to connect with Elijah after long deployments." I read them out loud, softly. Each word landed like a punch I didn't see coming. My mom had written that last line, the same woman who used to save every letter I mailed from overseas. I didn't throw the files, didn't rip them up. Instead, I highlighted every exaggerated claim, every timeline that didn't match up. I printed call logs, photos, school notes signed by me, even copies of FaceTime screenshots with Elijah during deployments. They wanted to build a version of me I didn't recognize. I was going to dismantle it line by line. Next, I hired an independent custody evaluator, not one of Daniel's picks, not someone local. I chose a retired army psychologist who now did civilian consultations, someone who would understand the cost of service and the depth of what it means to try and be both soldier and mother. She met with me, with Elijah, with Daniel, with my parents, and she listened, not judged, not assumed, listened, and meanwhile I kept digging. That's when the neighbour reached out. A soft knock on my door at 7 p.m, Mrs. Callahan. She lived across the street, the kind of woman who baked too much banana bread and always had gardening gloves on. She looked nervous, like she was about to confess a crime. "I didn't mean to overhear," she said, "but I thought you should know. I heard your mother on the phone last week. She was talking about, well, getting Elijah away from you. She said you needed to learn a lesson. Said Daniel would handle things if she helped him out." I stood there, stunned, and then she handed me a small flash drive. I didn't mean to record it, my son set up this home security thing for me, catches audio near the front porch. I heard it back, and I figured you'd want to hear it too. She left before I could say anything. I sat on my couch that night, heart pounding, watching the waveform dance across the screen as my mother's voice crackled through my laptop speaker. She needs to be reminded that family matters more than rank. This'll teach her. Daniel said if we help, he'll make sure she doesn't see Elijah again. We'll get him settled here before the next hearing. It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated. My own mother was helping my ex-husband cut me out of my son's life. For what? Pride? Punishment? Power? I pressed pause, just sat there in the quiet, and then I opened my notebook. I wrote 1 word across the top of the page: leverage. That night I also did something I hadn't done in months. I picked up a pen, pulled a blank sheet of paper from Elijah's old sketchpad, and started writing. "Dear Elijah, I know things feel confusing right now. You're hearing things I can't control, but I need you to know something. No matter where I am, no matter what the papers say, I am your mother, and I never stopped fighting for you." I didn't finish the letter. I folded it carefully and placed it in a shoebox beside the others. 23 letters so far, none of them sent. Not yet. By week's end, my case file was 2 inches thick. Evidence logs, witnesses, timeline charts, and at the top of it all, I clipped a photo of Elijah laughing on my shoulders, his tiny hands gripping my hair, his smile wide, wild. full of life. They thought I'd sit still while they took him from me. They forgot who they were up against. I don't yell. I don't beg. I show up. And when I do, I bring the truth with me. Some people walk into courtrooms hoping to be heard. I walked in prepared to be seen. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing, not because I was nervous, but because I knew what I was walking into, and I wasn't going in unarmed. My uniform hung on the door like a second skin waiting to be stepped into. 4 stars on the shoulders, a chest full of ribbons that didn't just tell stories, they earned them. And the weight of it all, literal and emotional, settled into my spine before I even buttoned the last button. I didn't choose the uniform to make a statement. I chose it because they spent months rewriting who I was, mother, soldier, woman, and it was time to take that narrative back. The courthouse was buzzing when I arrived. You could feel it, low hum of lawyers pacing the halls, the shuffle of paper, the steady ping of phones. But when I stepped through the metal detector, everything paused. Security guards stood up a little straighter. People glanced, then did double takes. I kept walking, slow, deliberate, controlled, just like they taught us. My heels clicked against the tile like a metronome counting down to impact. Daniel was already seated inside the courtroom, flanked by his lawyer, smug as ever. My parents were behind him, both dressed like it was Sunday service. My mother's lips parted when she saw me, and then she closed them tightly. My father's eyes darted to the table. He wouldn't meet mine. The judge entered. Older man, silver hair, soft voice, known for being no nonsense. But when he saw me, he did something no one expected. He stood, not because protocol demanded it, because respect did. The courtroom stilled. I heard the soft gasp from someone 2 rows behind me. I didn't turn, I didn't smirk, I took my seat. Hands folded, spine straight, heart steady, let them wonder, let them remember. My attorney began calmly, methodically dismantling their case. He didn't need theatrics. He had evidence. Deployment timelines proving I'd never missed a scheduled custody day. Video calls between me and Elijah every week. Emails from teachers, therapists, even Elijah's pediatrician, confirming his emotional health and bond with me. But the nail in the coffin came in 2 parts. First, the audio recording from Mrs. Callahan. It played through the courtroom speakers. My mother's voice, clear as day. She needs to be reminded that family matters more than rank. Daniel said if we help, he'll make sure she doesn't see Elijah again. Gasps. Audible. Real. I turned slightly, saw my mother's face go pale. Daniel stiffened, whispered something to his lawyer, but it wasn't over. Second, financial transfers. My attorney presented bank statements showing a $28,000 wire from my parents' joint retirement account to Daniel just 2 weeks before the court petition. They tried to argue it was a gift. The judge raised a brow. A gift coinciding precisely with a coordinated custody filing and character affidavit. Interesting timing. You could feel the shift in the room. Power was no longer on their side. It sat in silence across from them, in the shape of a soldier who refused to break. I didn't speak until the judge addressed me directly. Lieutenant General Harrow, do you have anything to add before we recess? I stood slowly, let the weight of my uniform settle into the room. No, Your Honour, I believe the facts speak for themselves. He nodded once, satisfied, and that was it. I didn't need to defend my motherhood. I had lived it. As the judge called for a recess, I remained seated. I didn't glance at my parents. Not yet. But I heard my mother's voice behind me, faint, shaking. She didn't have to do it like this. No, I didn't. But they didn't have to betray me either. And maybe that's something people like them never understand. Quiet people aren't weak. They're just careful. Until it's time to move. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited like vultures. I ignored them. My only focus was the boy waiting 2 floors up in the supervised family room, Elijah. When I walked in, he looked up from his sketchpad, paused, stared, then whispered, "You wore your stars." I knelt beside him. "Yeah, buddy, I did." He hesitated, then leaned in, arms wrapping around my neck so tight it knocked the breath from me. And that was the moment the war was already won, not with the judge's gavel, but with a 10-year-old's hug that said, "I see you now, Mum. I remember who you are." Some questions from a child carry the weight of 1,000 battles, and they never ask them when you expect it. They ask them when your armour is off. It had been 3 hours since the judge ruled. The courtroom had emptied, the reporters scattered, even Daniel had disappeared before I could see if he would speak to my parents again. I didn't care. I wasn't looking for closure from him or them. I only cared about the boy now sitting beside me on the courthouse steps, legs swinging just barely above the ground. Elijah had been quiet since the ruling, not withdrawn, not cold, just processing. His small hand stayed in mine the whole way down the stairs. He didn't say much, but he didn't let go either, and that silence meant more than anything anyone else had said in months. We sat there for a while, the courthouse behind us, the wide sky above. The afternoon sun had started to soften into early evening, casting long shadows across the concrete. Elijah kicked at a pebble with his sneaker, then stopped suddenly and looked up at me. "Are you mad at Grandma and Grandpa?" I froze, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I didn't know which version he needed to hear. I looked at him. His face was so open, so direct. Eyes like his father's, but softer. He wasn't just asking out of curiosity. He was asking because he needed to know if it was okay for him to be angry too. I turned slightly, faced him, and took a slow breath. "No, baby, I'm not mad." I let the words settle. Then I added quietly, "I'm just sad." He tilted his head, confused. "Why?" I looked straight ahead. Because they never really saw me for who I was. Not as their daughter, not as your mom, just someone they needed to fix. He nodded but said nothing, so I continued. And when people decide you're broken, it doesn't matter how much you try to show them you're whole, they've already made up their minds. A long pause passed between us. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, Elijah said, "They told me you didn't want me." I looked at him sharply, but his eyes were cast down at his shoes. "They said you left because work was more important, that you didn't come back on purpose." My throat clenched. For a moment I didn't know if I could respond, but I had to. Not with defense, not with tears, with truth. "That was never true, Elijah. Never. I came back for you every single time. I called, I wrote, I sent videos. I never, not once, stopped thinking about you." His eyes filled. "I thought maybe I did something wrong." I pulled him to me before he could finish the sentence, wrapped my arms around him and held him like he was 5 again, when he still fit entirely in my lap. "You didn't do anything wrong," I whispered into his hair. "You were never the reason. You were always the reason I kept going." He nodded against my chest, and I could feel it, the wall cracking, not crashing down, not yet, but a shift, a soft breaking open of something that had been bricked over for too long. That night I took him home. Home, not the base housing, not a hotel, not my parents' guest room, my home. I let him pick what we had for dinner, boxed mac and cheese and orange slices. He set the table, carefully, even folded the napkins. After we ate, he pulled out a shoebox from his bag and said, "I kept these, the ones you sent." Inside were letters I'd written from overseas, most of them never responded to. All of them crumpled, a little worn, but read. My heart broke in a different way then, because while I thought I was shouting into a void, he'd been listening all along. As I tucked him into bed, Elijah asked one last question. "Can I call you Mama again?" I choked back a laugh and tears at the same time. "You can call me anything, baby, but that one's my favourite." He smiled, rolled over, fell asleep within minutes, and I sat beside his bed long after that, just listening to the rhythm of his breathing. You know, when people talk about revenge stories, they usually think of courtroom victories, dramatic walkouts, or public takedowns. But for me, this is it. This moment, a child who was once turned against me by the people who raised me. reaching back, trusting me again, no headline, no gavel slam, just this. Peace in the form of a quiet hand reaching for mine. They tried to erase me with paperwork. I answered with presence. They tried to steal my son. I showed him who I am. It's been 6 weeks since the hearing. The press moved on. Daniel moved out of state. And my parents? Well, they sent an email last week. We didn't expect you to embarrass us like that, Camille. No apology, no ownership. Just wounded pride from people who built a house on silence and were shocked when the walls finally cracked. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I finally didn't owe them an explanation. And that's the part no one tells you about surviving betrayal. Sometimes the real closure isn't confrontation. It's not needing it anymore. Elijah and I are still learning each other again. He doesn't ask me every night if I'm coming back in the morning anymore, but he still watches the door when I leave the room. Trust isn't a light switch, it's a dimmer, and right now I'm just grateful the lights are back on. Last week we went to the park near our old house, the one I used to push him around in a stroller back when he thought dandelions were magic. He asked me if we could get ice cream after. I said yes. He chose vanilla swirl with rainbow sprinkles. I got black coffee gelato. We sat on a wooden bench under a rustling elm tree, just us. No press, no lawyers, no documents. He looked over and said, between licks, "Do people know you're a general?" I smiled. Some do. He thought for a moment, then said, "Do I have to call you that?" I laughed. "Only if we're on a battlefield." He grinned and nodded. Then he leaned his head against my arm, and for a second I forgot all the courtrooms, all the affidavits, all the meetings where they made me feel like a stranger to my own child. This right here, this was the redemption. Not a title, not a ruling, but belonging. You know, people always ask why I never fought back sooner, why I didn't go public with what they did, why I didn't cut them off earlier, why I still don't go after them now. I get it, everyone loves revenge stories, but what they don't always understand is not everyone gets the luxury of screaming. Some of us were raised to stay quiet, stay small, stay out of the way. We were told, don't cause trouble, while the people who hurt us kept rewriting the story until we couldn't recognize our own lives anymore. And then, one day, you stop shrinking, not because you're suddenly brave, but because your child asks, "Why don't you fight for me?" And you realize, you already are, just not in a way they can see yet. I didn't win in court because I had medals. I won because I had receipts, I had truth, and I had a child who deserved better than a family tree full of liars. Some days I still think about my parents. I wonder if they sit in their living room watching the news and see my name scroll across the bottom of the screen, if they see me standing next to the Secretary of Defence, or speaking on behalf of veterans' families, or walking in uniform at Arlington. Do they feel proud? Do they feel shame? Or worse, do they still feel nothing? Because in the end, maybe that was the most brutal betrayal, not what they did, but how little it seemed to mean to them. Elijah asked me last night if he could take my old dog tags for show and tell. I let him. He wore them like they were made of gold. "I'm going to tell them my mom's a general," he said proudly, "but also that she makes the best grilled cheese." I cried a little when he wasn't looking, because that's who I always wanted to be. Not just Lieutenant General Camille Harrow, 4 stars and all, but Mum, the one who stayed, the one who kept showing up, the one who never gave up, even when everyone else walked away. So if you're watching this right now, and your family made you feel like you were too much or never enough, if they told you that your love wasn't real unless it looked like their version of love, if they abandoned you for choosing peace over performance, then I hope you hear me when I say you don't need their permission to be whole. Some of us were never the golden child. We were the quiet ones, the forgotten ones. But here's the thing, forgotten doesn't mean gone, and quiet doesn't mean weak. Sometimes it just means we were building something they never saw coming. Now it's your turn. If you've ever been shut out by your family, if someone tried to erase your love, your story, your right to belong, tell me. drop a still here in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from, because I promise you someone else reading is going through the same silence. And sometimes just knowing you're not the only one, that's the beginning of your own comeback story.